will preach the same lesson, but not necessarily in the same way. Jesus was like that. You may remember a few weeks ago when Dennis Gullidge was here and he was talking about the Sermon on the Mount. He compared it to Luke's version, which is sometimes referred to as the Sermon on the Plain. A lot of the same territory is covered, a lot of the same things, but there are some subtle differences in it, and one of the most distinct is at the very beginning. When Luke starts his passage he talks about the woes that they would be facing. In Luke chapter 6 and verses 20 and 23, he begins the sermon the way we would expect him to. He talks about blessed are the poor, blessed are the who hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are those who weep, blessed are those when men insult you. We may recognize these either the same beatitudes, blessings that we see in the Sermon on the Mount on Matthew. And in each of them, he seems to take something that would appear negative, and he says, maybe it's not as bad as you think. But he does something distinctly different when it comes to the second part. In Luke chapter 6 and verses 24 through 26, he says, but woe to you who are rich, for you are receiving your comfort in full. Woe to you who are hungry, who are well fed now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when men speak well of you, for their fathers used to treat the prophets in the same way. Here, not only is he just pointing out that you might be blessed under negative circumstances, he then says, but woe when you find yourselves in what we would probably describe as positive circumstances. This isn't the only time Jesus would issue woe. Sometimes there are those who say, well, Jesus never talked against anything. That's not the case. In Matthew chapter 23, he goes pretty hard against the Pharisees and their attitude. Woe to you, Pharisees, scribes, and hypocrites. But here in what we read now, he seems to go against things we might not expect. When we read that list, we may say, whoa, what does he mean by that? How aren't these things good things? To have money, to be well fed, to have people like you? I mean, these are good characteristics, aren't they? So let's examine what Jesus is telling us here in these woes. Let's start with the very first one. Woe to you who are rich. It seems to be a statement here that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Woe to you that are rich? I mean, the Bible does tell us that riches are given to us as a blessing of God. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and 19 says, furthermore, every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. The fact that we've been given blessings and we can use those to take care of our lives, to take care of others, those riches we are blessed with, it's a gift from God. So how then can Jesus say, woe to you who are rich? We think of riches as the ultimate, right? Riches is something we would want. We would want to have riches, but he says, woe to you who are receiving riches. Why? Because you've received your comfort in full. Jesus would say in Luke chapter 18, verse 24, how hard it is for those who are wealthy to enter into the kingdom of God. What an interesting statement. How could your wealth keep you from obeying the gospel? Well, it comes down to the fact that our wealth sometimes makes us think we don't need God. We have everything, so why would we seek him out? We are getting our comfort in full. The psalmist writes about this in Psalm 52, verse 7. Behold the man who would not make God his refuge. Why? But trusted in the abundance of his riches and strong in his evil desire. Notice there, he talks about the man who would not make God his refuge. He wouldn't trust in God. Why? Because he didn't think he needed to. He had riches. He had wealth. Those could protect him. He didn't have to worry about trouble because he had enough in the bank to cover it. What's the problem? Those riches don't last. James would speak about this in James chapter 1 and verses 9 through 11. When he says, the brother of humble circumstances is to glory in his high position, and the rich man is to glory in his humiliation. Now, we usually don't think of somebody rich as being in a state of humiliation. But why? Well, the text says, because like the flowering grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with a scorching wind and withers the grass, and the flower falls off, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So too, the rich man in the midst of his pursuits will fade away. It's a pretty good visual for right now, right? That grass withers. You know, about a month ago, I came home when I went to polishing the pulpit, and my grass was pretty high, and I had to mow it and almost mow it right again just to get it back down, right? Because it had grown so much because we were getting a bunch of rain. But I can tell you, my grass right now doesn't look that well. The sun's came out, the rain is gone, and it's dying fast. Blessings of this earth can go just as fast. And if we think that we are set because we have them, well, we better enjoy them while we can. Jesus says, woe to those who are rich because you're receiving your reward in full. This is as good as you will get it. If you trust in riches, if you hope in it, if you make them your refuge, you're going to be disappointed. Because as the old saying goes, you can't take it with you. And even if you could, what good would it be? We need to understand that just because someone has a lot in this world doesn't really mean they have what they need. The second woe that he gives is, woe to you who are well fed. Who wants to go hungry? You know, we want to feed someone. You know, I compare this to our children. I think every parent has ever experienced this, where you have your kids and you fix dinner and you set them down at the table and they look at it and they go, I don't want this, right? I'm not hungry. I don't want anything. And you tell them, please, eat, right? Eat a little bit. Try a little bit of it, right? Just eat a little bit of it. And they'll fuss and, and finally you'll almost, grab their mouth and shove it down their throat. You're going to eat this, right? But that doesn't work either. And finally you just give up, right? You don't want to eat, you don't want to eat. Go hungry. See if I care. And then usually, about 5-10 minutes later, they come in, can I have a snack? I'm hungry. We just ate. There was plenty of food. You didn't have it. Why didn't you want it then, right? Well, that's not necessarily what they wanted, right? They wanted that snack later. Here Jesus says, woe to you who are well fed. Maybe we are feeding ourselves on the wrong things, and therefore we don't hunger for the right things. Years ago, there was a man by the name of Howard Rutledge. He was a United States Air Force pilot. He was shot down in the early parts of the Vietnam War, was captured, and he was put in what was known as the Hanoi Hilton, a prisoner of war for many years until he was eventually released at the war's end. He wrote about his experiences, and in that he said this. He said, during those long periods of forced reflection, it became so much easier to separate the important from the trivial, the worthwhile from the waste. For example, I'd usually worked or played hard on Sundays. I had no time for church. For years, Phyllis, that was his wife, had encouraged me to join the family at church. She never nagged or scolded. She just kept hoping, but I was too busy, too preoccupied to spend 1 or 2 short hours a week thinking about really important things. But he said, now the sights and sounds and smells of death were all around me. My hunger for spiritual food outdid my hunger even for a steak. Now I wanted to talk about God and Christ in the church, but in heartbreak, that's what they called the P.F.D.O. camp. There was no preacher, no Sunday school, no Bible class, no hymn book, no community of believers to guide me and sustain me. I had completely neglected the spiritual dimension of my life, and it took prison to show me how empty life is without God. Woe to you who are well fed. Why? For you shall be hungry. I think we eat a lot of junk food, and we think it fills us up. But what we're really hungry for, what we're really desperate for, is something deeper, something more meaningful. The prophet Amos said in Amos chapter 8, verse 11, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord your God, when I will send a famine on the land. A famine not for bread or a thirst for water, but rather hearing the word of the Lord." Sometimes we need to go a little bit hungry so we can recognize how good we have it. I remember years ago when I was growing up, Mom had to go back to school for a little bit for some classwork, and so that meant she wasn't cooking every night, and we were having to fend for ourselves, and let's just say we weren't real good at fending. For a while there, Mom would fix something and I'd turn my nose up to it. I didn't want that again. That wasn't my favorite. But, after a few weeks of not getting fed, it didn't matter what Mom made. It tasted pretty good. Maybe we're filling ourselves up with so much stuff that we really can't hunger and thirst for righteousness. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are, or woe to those who are well fed." Fed on the wrong things and not recognizing that they will have at a time when it's not there. The time of spiritual enlightenment usually isn't the time of spiritual crisis. If we wait till that point, we'll find ourselves without what we needed to sustain us. If we don't eat when we're fed, it's going to be harder to get that when we're not. That's why it's vital that we seek after it, the right things that will sustain us, so that we will be filled with the right things. But Jesus continues and said, "Woe to those who laugh." I like to laugh. I like a good joke. What's wrong with laughing? What's wrong with joy? Wouldn't you rather be somewhere fun than somewhere miserable? Wouldn't you rather go to a party than a funeral? That's a pretty easy choice, wouldn't you think? But consider what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 2 through 5. "It's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting, because it is the end of every man. The living take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter. When the face is sad, a heart may be happy. The mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. For it is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than to listen to the song of fools." Things that may not seem pleasurable on the surface will oftentimes bring us more happiness. You think about that when it comes to things like Bible class attendance, worship. It's easy to convince ourselves that, we can spend that weekend having a lot more fun, being somewhere a lot more entertaining. That'd be much better for us. But Jesus says, "Woe to you who laugh." Why? Because you shall mourn and weep. You see, if we live our lives thinking all it's about is making ourselves happy, that may not actually be a good thing for us. Lessons that challenge us, topics that make us think, may not be the easy, fun thing, but they may be what we need. I remember years ago, a preacher said, a lot of times people would come up to me and say, "I enjoyed that lesson." He always took that as a compliment, and he got to thinking about it, and he said, if they just enjoyed it, that may not be a good thing, right? Because oftentimes we enjoy things because we like to hear it. It feels good to us. But that may not always be what we need. Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy 4:3, "A time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance with their own desire." Jesus said, "Woe to you who laugh." If we think our life is just about having a good time, when we want everything to be just entertaining and fun, we might be missing out on things that actually are, more important. The deeper things. Better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than listen to the song of fools. In a world today that just wants to be constantly entertained every second of every day, we can't even sit for 5 minutes with our thoughts because we got to pull out the phone and scroll through something to give us some entertainment. It might be a really bad thing for us because it doesn't help us consider the deeper things. It doesn't help us consider things that may make us uncomfortable, but may motivate us to do what we need to do. Finally, Jesus says, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you." A good name's a good thing, isn't it? I mean, Proverbs 22:1 says, "A good name is to be more desired than great wealth. Favor is better than silver and gold." When we think about being rich, right? Well, if we were really rich, but everybody hated us and nobody liked us, that wouldn't be a good thing. But, well, if everybody patted us on the back and said, "How good a job you're doing. Oh, you're wonderful," that'd be a great thing, wouldn't it? Or would it? Mark Twain once said, "Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and think." If everyone thinks well of us, it might be because, well, all we're concerned about is giving them what they wanted. Consider the words of Jesus in John chapter 15 and verses 18 through 19. "If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Because you are not of the world, I chose you out of the world, and because of this, the world hates you." There's an innate desire in us. We want to be liked, right? We want to be accepted. We don't like it if somebody doesn't like us or somebody looks down on us. And that can cause us to do things that we know aren't right? Just to get the positive accolades. Jesus says, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you." Why? Because that's what they did to the false prophets. That's what they did to those who were working against God. He conversed that with those who stood for the truth and were persecuted for it. And sometimes we need to have the right enemies. You know, we hear that word today and we say, well, you know, do you have an enemy? Probably, I don't think I have an enemy, right? I mean, we might be in a situation where we have a rival, right? Maybe somebody who we're competing against. Think of that as our enemy. That's not really an enemy. A true enemy is someone you oppose because not doing so would be wrong. In our culture today, it doesn't want us to have enemies, right? Don't do anything that would upset anyone. But if we don't, doesn't that tell us we've never fought for something right or stood up for what is good? You know, a true enemy can become our friend only if one of us changes. So are we the one who are changing? Are we the one that's conforming to the world so that we can be liked by the world? Because Jesus says the world's going to hate you if you look like me because they hated me. The things he stood up for, the things he said, it turned people against him. Because it was too much. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to follow it. Are we making the mistake of becoming a little more like the world and less like our Father and thinking that it's a good thing? That the world praises us, that we've done something well, when in fact what we might have done has moved us away from our Lord? Do we think we're doing better than we are? If I had fame, if I had food, if I had fun, if I had finances, those are the goals, right, that the world wants. I want to be rich and famous. I don't want for anything. I want to enjoy my life. I want to go to the best and brightest places. That would make my life worthwhile. That would be the good life. But Jesus says, woe to you. Woe to you that are rich. Woe to you that are well-fed. Woe to you who laugh. Woe to you when everyone thinks great of you. Because our finances will fail us. Our fame will fade away. The food will no longer satisfy. The fun won't be any fun anymore. But what God is offering us is everlasting. It may not be in the moment always the fun and entertainment of the world, but it'll have meaning. It won't be the riches that the world desires, but it will have eternal treasure that lasts. It won't be the food that gives a momentary feeling and then later you're still hungry. But it will be the bread of life that satisfies. It'll be the water that we drink from where we'll never thirst again. The person will want to say to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant," will not be the people of this world, but it will be God on Judgment Day. Woe to you. Maybe we need to look and make sure that we're not falling into the trap of falling for all the wrong things. Because our true happiness, our true life, and true meaning isn't found in the things of this world. It's found in the things of next. So let's make sure we're ready for that journey. Tonight, if you've never obeyed the gospel, if you never believed in Jesus, if you've never turned from your sins, if you've never had those sins washed away in baptism, if you've never made that good confession as Jesus as Lord, don't wait. It's the greatest thing that you can ever do. Not because it will make your life here easy and perfect, not because it will win you fame and friends, but rather that it'll give you what truly matters, what's truly important, the connection that you truly need most, the desire that will matter for all eternity. Maybe as a Christian, we've been caught up in the world and the things of the world and forgotten who our first love should be. Maybe it's time that we put Him first in our lives and dedicate ourselves back to His cause. Tonight, if you're subject to the invitation, tonight if you need to follow in Christ, tonight if you need the prayers of your brothers and sisters, we want to offer you a time to let that need be known right now while we sing this song.